We are back. Now I will introduce Jonathan Sanz-Perl. It's a pleasure to introduce him. Jonathan obtained his PhD in physics, working in the Dynamical Systems Lab in Buenos Aires University. Then after that, he worked for 5 years as a researcher in total energy. And then he became a postdoctoral researcher in the Computational Cognitive Neuroscience Lab, Buenos Aires University also. And now he's currently a researcher in Pompeu Fabra University, where he studies the emergence of global and structural behavior in the human brain using computer simulations, dynamical systems, and machine learning techniques. So, thank you.
Thanks, Gonza, for introducing me. And thank you, Gonza, Pascal, and people organizing this really nice workshop. So yes, I will present a work that we have done working with Gus that has already presented the work of his side, and mainly the talk is called Visualizing Perturbation of Consciousness State using Whole Brain Model combined with variational autoencoder. And as I said, this is a work that we have been done together with Enzo in University of Buenos Aires, with Gustavo in Pompeu Fabra, and with Jaco Sid in Paris Brain Institute. So basically, I will revisit some ideas and similar approaches that Gustavo presented before, but I try to explain more in detail how it works, some part of the models and so on. So this is the main agenda of the talk. Will be basically a motivation of why we want to perform this kind of analysis, then an overall overview of our strategy, a more detailed explanation about the method, and then a couple of results using this method that basically are based on the low representation of this global state of reduced consciousness that we can get through this modeling and autoencoder dimensional reduction. Then how we can map model perturbations in this latent space that we get with autoencoder, and then applications also to a different kind of brain state that would be in this case neurodegenerative disease, and then conclusions and discussions of the result and method or what. So basically the motivation is that as we know, the brain is a really complex system that has an emergent behavior that came from the interaction of a lot of small units connected by billions of synaptic connections. But at the end of the day, this super big dimensional system is integrated, and the integrations helps to the system self-organize into global brain state, into a small number of global brain state, and this integration creates the emergence of patterns and the capacity of the cognitive processing and so on. So based on that fact that the integration helped to this kind of emergence of global brain state, we also hypothesize that this reduction of the high dimensional of the system and this reduction of the degree of freedom of the system, can we also obtain it in the brain image data through the quantification of the data. And there's a lot of approaches that is working on that direction with different method, tools that is working on reduce the dimension of neuroimaging data. So we will work on that direction, and we propose our method that includes a combination of the whole brain model together with in this case a deep learning structure that I will detail as follows. So our strategy is mainly based in these 3 steps. A first step is we will use neuroimaging data coming from functional magnetic resonance imagings for fMRI data. So we will work with different fMRI data coming from different brain state that I will explain further, but this is our main empirical data that we're using. Then we will build a whole brain model of this data, the whole brain model in the sense of the model that Gustavo presented before. It's like I will explain further in detail. And the third step is we will put the data that we generate with our model representing the empirical data into autoencoder in order to obtain a low dimensional representation of our brain state. So And after that, we will perturb our models and we will get the low dimensional representation of that perturbations. So this is our strategy. So I will detail how this methodology, how this method work. So I will through step by step some kind of detail in order to be clear how it works. So empirical data that we use are basically fMRI recordings, as I said before. So basically, the fMRI recording is obtained like in a voxel level that is a really high dimensional space. And typically, these voxel level are upscaling through a brain parcellation that coming from an atlas that could be based on different kind of concept approach, could be more anatomical, automatical, or a plethora of brain atlas. So in this case, we work with one atlas that is called automatical anatomical level, that is the AAL, that is composed in our case by 90 regions. So basically, the voxel level is upscaling through put it into an atlas, and the N we get with time series, as is depicted here, and we get like N time series, which N is the number of brain regions or parcels that you are getting through the brain parcellation. As I said before, I will work with 90 regions. And on the other hand, with this kind of recording, we also get fusion MRI recordings that go tractography processing, and also considering a brain atlas, we get how the different brain regions are connected. So this we call the structural connectivity or the anatomical connectivity. That basically is a way to quantify the how coupled are the different brain regions. So at the end of the day, this is an n-dimensional graph indicating how in our case, the 90 regions are connected and how strong are that connections. So we work basically with different brains, different state of reduced consciousness in this work. And the data that we are using is for different ways to reduce the consciousness. So one is like in a reversible way in our daily life, that is the sleep stages. Basically, we will work with three different sleep stages, that is like early sleep, middle sleep, and deep sleep, calling N1, N2, and N3. We are not taking into account in this case REM sleep. All the stages are non-REM stages. Then we will work with anesthesia. So we will work with two different levels of anesthesia: light anesthesia that we call sedated with S, and deep anesthesia that is the loss of consciousness due to anesthesia. And then we used to say that these states are like reversible, but are more stable in the sense that if you perturb an anesthesia, you won't get up a guy who's anesthetized. This is due to a medical doctor practice surgery with anesthesia and not people sleeping. So, and on the last data set that we use are the disorders of consciousness, post-coma stages. And we consider two states, that one is the minimal consciousness state and the unresponsive wakefulness state, that are like two stages in this case. In this case, we consider that also this is like a more unperturbable state. So this is the fMRI data that we are using, and with this kind of data, we will feed our Hover model. In other words, we will build Hover model in order to reproduce this data. So how we build our Hover model as follows. So we will get some empirical sources. That's what we say. The empirical sources will be the time series for fMRI, and the main observable that we are trying to feed with wet models will be the functional connectivity. That the functional connectivity is the pairwise correlation between each time signal that we have. So and basically it looks like this kind of matrix that Gustavo shows in his presentation. And the other source of empirical information that we are using is, as I say, is the structural connectivity. That is how connected are the brain regions. That will represent the underlying coupling of the model. So, and then we will represent the dynamical behavior of each brain region through a nonlinear oscillator that is called Stirling oscillator, but basically it's a nonlinear oscillator that enables the system to be in a fixed point behavior. That this means that there's no dynamical, that the dynamical decays through a fixed point. On the other hand, it's an oscillatory behavior that this means that the system is able to keep it oscillator. So it's a quite simple model. I mean, it's the most simple model that enables to present these two kind of behaviors. So in the middle, we have something that we call a bifurcation. Particularly, this is a Hopf bifurcation, that when the system is above that bifurcation is oscillating, and when the system is below the bifurcation is in a fixed point dynamics. So each brain region is represented through one oscillator and is coupling to the strengths of the structural anatomy. So this is the full equation from one specific node. So basically, is the first part of the equation is the Stirling oscillation itself, that is this Hopf bifurcation normal form, and the last term is the coupling term. So this is the input that this node has to be involved in a network. So, and with this model, we have two model fitting parameters. That this means we are able to explore two parameters that we can manage to fit the functional connectivity by creating a model functional connectivity. So these two parameters, one is the bifurcation parameter A, that is this one that is that I change to change the bifurcation, the relation through the bifurcation point. And the other is G, that is coupling strength parameters, that is a parameter that are scaling, that is scaling equally all the connections in the matrix. It's like a global scaling parameter. So this is the two parameter fitting that we are working, or that we are using in order to fit our models. So this is our optimization parameter strategy. So basically, we will use sorry, Pascal.
Yeah, if I can, just can you explain what is the intuition behind this X and Y? What is it? Is the
Sorry.
part like
Yeah.
the activity of neurons? Or?
No. No, sorry. Sorry, yes. Basically, the by the X variable. So thank you for the question. So yes, there's not represented two different things. Are mainly the full behavior is the full equation. So this is the real and imaginary part. So we represent the deformized signal only with the real one, but we can represent also with the imaginary part. Thank you. So and our fitting strategy will include another empirical information, that is the belonging of the brain regions to a resting state network. So the resting state network are networks in the brains that are very proved that their brain regions are used to act together in different brain states. Also is really established across wakefulness, sleep, and so on. So basically, we will consider 6 resting state networks. So we will gather the brain regions that belongs to a certain resting state network. So it's like we are putting together regions into these 6 resting state network, and then we perform a parameter optimization through a genetic algorithm with the goal to improve the level of fitting that we get within the empirical functional connectivity and the simulated functional connectivity. The simulated functional connectivity is the one that we get with the time series simulated and the pairwise correlation of the time series simulated. So at the end, and we will compare these two matrices through a metric that we call SSIM, that is the structural similarity index, that is like an image comparison that it's taking into account both, like the structure and also the background level. So this is like a combination of this index combines like two of the most typical metrics that they use, that is the distance or the correlation. So in somehow it's like combining the distance and the correlation between these two metrics in one index. So at the end of the day, the output of our model will be 7 optimized parameters, 1 for each network that we are considering 6 network, and 1 is the coupling strength parameter. So, and the next step is a data augmentation procedure using the model. So we will use the model like in a generative way. So we will feed our model with optimizing parameters, and we generate several instances of our model to get like a plethora of functional connectivity represented this brain state, so in augmented way. So basically, I would say part of this work is inspired in Gonzalez's work that use models to augment data. So this is like a data augmentation model driver, I would say. In this case, I use the model to augment data. So we generate a plethora of functional activity augmented through the model. And then the last step of our approach is to use this functional connectivity augmented to train a variational autoencoder. And this is, in this point, is why we want to augment data, because we need like a lot of data to train an autoencoder that is not really easy to get from functional image, empirical data. So we will use this augmented functional connectivity to train this variational autoencoder. That basically a variational autoencoder is a deep learning structure that is composed by an encoder and then a decoder, and in between we have like a bottleneck that is this quite low dimensional space that is called latent space. And the goal of that autoencoder is to reproduce as good as is possible the input and the output in the full procedure, but in between you are getting like a low dimensional representation. So the input of our autoencoder will be the augmented functional connectivities, and the output also will be a functional connectivity, and the training has a loss function that is composed by 2 terms. This is why this is a variational autoencoder and not only an autoencoder. And these 2 terms that characterize a variational autoencoder are the reconstruction term that takes into account how similar are the input and the output in some metric, and also a regularization term that is a term that is guaranteed that the latent space is quite regular. That it means that if you are decoding 2 points that are close in the latent space, it means that you will reproduce 2 similar stuff in the output space. And in the similar way, when you are encoding 2 things that are quite similar, will be close in the latent space. So, and because we will use our low dimensional representation also in a generative way, this is why we need to train a variational autoencoder instead a simple autoencoder. So we need that our latent space are regular and can be used in a generative way. So now we will talk about the results that we get through this method. So basically, so far I present the method. So now we start to discuss about the results that we get of the method. And in my opinion, the first relevant result that we get is the following: this, that the low dimensional organization that we observe of this global state of reduced consciousness in the latent space. So first, in order to show all the process and how it goes, I show how good are the whole brain model of the data. So we build one whole brain model for each brain state that we use. So we will use 8 brain states or 8 states of consciousness, calling wakefulness state. It's a wakefulness state in resting state, and the 3 sleep stages, the 2 anesthetized stages, and the 2 types of patients. So in this panel, we can see like this half matrix. So the lower diagonal part of this matrix is how it looks like the functional connectivity empirical, and the upper part is how it looks the functional connectivity model in this case. So we built 8 different models, 1 for each brain state. What that means, when we perform the optimization procedure for each one of them, but it's important to take into account that we're working at group level. What this means, we take all the subjects or participants in one state, and then we average, and we get the average functional connectivity, and we target the average functional connectivity of the group. So this is an approach that is a group level. We are not modeled each individual, right? So it's like we get a model that represents this global state, not the individual. And then in this lower panel, we are getting how is the structural similarity index in modeling each condition. And as you can see, more or less are quite similar between them. So there's not like one that is really good and another is really bad. This decrease while also the brain state, the level of consciousness decreased, but it's not dramatically. So, and then the same, but how good is the variation, the autoencoder in reconstruct the matrices? So the same, in this case, are hybrid matrix, and I'm showing how is this is the input, that is the model, the lower diagonal, and the upper diagonal is the reconstructed one through the autoencoder. And again, the level of the reconstruction measured by the SSIM. So again, it's a really good reconstruction. So in somehow, we are showing how good are our framework in terms to keep the information or the structure that we have in the empirical original data with the whole process. So then the thing that we did is we trained the autoencoder using only 3 of these stages. So we train our autoencoder using wakefulness, N3, and unresponsive wakefulness state. So we train also using the augmented data of these states, and this is that we get in the 2-dimensional space. This is the encoding of a test data set. And then we encode all the state that we are considering the work. So the first interesting result is that all the stages are like organized into 1-dimensional manifold embedded in this 2-dimensional latent space, and organize it like in a sense that there's a direction of the losses of consciousness, because we start with wakefulness here in the upper right side, and then when you are going through this direction, or these 2 manifold, you are like fronting different brain state that is conforming you are reducing the level of consciousness. This is early sleep, into sleep, deep sleep, sedation, loss of consciousness due to anesthesia, minimal consciousness state, and unresponsive. So this is why we think that it's interesting, because we are getting like an organization of this brain state in this 2-dimensional latent space, and the organization seems to represent a direction that is a direction of the loss of the consciousness. And here in the upper right side, we're getting that we call the multiverse, that is which kind of matrices we get when we encode, when we decode a grid in latent space. So this is all the family of functional connectivity that we can generate with our autoencoder. And this is how this one-dimensional manifold is embedded in this multiverse. And here in the lower panel, you can see this direction that it seems to go to from unconsciousness to consciousness, how it looks like the different functional connectivity that we're getting. And in the lower part is like a normalized version of these matrices that allows us to see how the level of integration changed. While you increase the level of consciousness, the matrix show more integration, and when we are like in more unconsciousness state, it's like the system is like more segregated, something that is well known that is related with also with consciousness. So then we characterize the latent space in terms of features of this functional connectivity that we generate. This means we get that multiverse in the previous slide. So we then characterize this latent space, this matrix, in terms of metrics of this decoded functional connectivity. So the latent space present like in the upper right side, like matrix with more. This is the mean functional connectivity. This is the modularity, and this is the coupling between the functional and the structure, that are metrics that is used to is used to characterize the level of consciousness in some point, because when the functional and the structural are more similar, it seems that it's proved that it's more close to unconscious state. So, and then we organize our brain state in terms of this metric. So as you can see, the wakefulness is the one that has, the wakefulness and endless sleep are the one that has more functional activity means, and the lowest, the reduced, the more unconscious state are the present, which are presenting the less functional activity mean. As in the opposite happened with the other two metrics, the network modularity and the coupling, while the wakefulness state and early sleep stages are the lowest state in terms of the coupling between FC and C and the modularity, and the unresponsive state and the sedation state is one that represents the more coupling. So, and then we perform model perturbations, and then we encode these model perturbations into that latent space, training with these three brain states. So the same latent space, then we will use to encode the model perturbations. And why we want to perturb the model? Because in my opinion, there's two reasons. One is like basic reason, that is investigate how is the stability or instability of this state and see how it behaves, but also it has like a clinical implications, because we can explore these perturbations through model and to provide some kind of insight or ideas how this state can behave when are perturbed. And this could be something interesting in order to provide some insights to the clinical aspect, because several of these states are proposed to treat by interventions as TMS and different kind of interventions. So perform in silico perturbations, it's interesting in itself. So we are proposing like a way to visualize these model perturbations and a way to quantify in terms of geometrical approach in this latent space. So what I mean through model perturbations, this is the procedure that we use. So we start with the optimized parameter that we get for each brain state. Then again, we use the model like in a generative way. So we are providing the optimal parameter for each brain state to the model, and we generate data with that model. But in this case, in between, we will add an external periodical force to the nodes to different regions. In terms of the equation, we will add like a forcing, external forcing with the same frequency of the node. And we will parameterize by a forcing strength. So, and in this case, we only perturb by pairs of homotomical regions. So we will perform the left and the right zone. So by only one pair by time. So we will explore 45 different perturbations, one for each pair. And the other parameter that we are exploring is the forcing strength. So we have two free parameters to explore different kind of perturbation. And then we will generate perturbed functional connectivity. For each pair and for each forcing strength, we will generate a functional connectivity that is emergent from that perturbation. And then we want to encode this functional connectivity perturbed in the latent space that we get. So this is an example of perturb the loss of consciousness state in different brain regions. So in the left, we can see like I call not useful perturbation, that because it's like a perturbation that is not generating like a transition through in the direction of the wakefulness state. So I mean, I want to wake up this state. So like in terms of our model, it means that I want to put the loss of consciousness state closer to the wakefulness state. So when we are perturbing this region, we are not getting a good transition. So we are not perturbed like in a good direction, this state. This point is the trajectory that we get when we perturb that while we are increasing the forcing. the three cases, we have the same forcing strength, 0 to 0.2. The middle case is a perturbation in these brain regions that it seems to generate a trajectory in the latent space that it seems to move in the proper direction because it's through the cloud that belongs to the loss of consciousness, toward the cloud that belongs to wakefulness state, but it seems that this is not enough, the strength of the perturbation. And in the last case, we have a trajectory that it seems actually to be induce a good transition toward this tube from loss of consciousness toward wakefulness. So then we can perform this like exhaustively to all the brain stem that we are considering and all the nodes of the brain. So we get this kind of approaches. This again is loss of consciousness, transitioning toward wakefulness, and this is the trajectory for one node. But this is the trajectory of the 45 pair of nodes that you are perturbing in the middle panel. And this red arrow is the average perturbation that we get for this brain state. So as I said before, we can reproduce exhaustively this approach for the different brain state. So we are getting different arrows for the different brain state. But this is like the picture of how are this state in terms of the middle transition that we can get. So, and then we can quantify all these transitions in terms of geometrical metrics. This is the interesting part from my point of view of this approach, that we are mapping perturbations into a two-dimensional space as a trajectory, and we are able to quantify in this space that is also good to visualize it, but also easy to compute geometrical approaches. So we can define like the distance to wakefulness as a metric to provide how good or how perturbable are each brain state. So as you can see, this is how it behaves, these brain states in terms of distance to wakefulness. So the minimal consciousness and responsive are the ones that are faster for wakefulness, and the sleep stages is the one that are when perturbed are closer to wakefulness. And in this panel, we are showing the distance to wakefulness as a function of the forcing strength. And something that is interesting is the system seems to be saturated. It means that it's not that if we provide more force to the system, to the perturbations, we are getting better transition. So in some point, the system reach a limit. So it's not, we don't need more force, or it's not a thing of more force to induce better transition. So it's more something related with which kind of region we are perturbed. So, and we can compute a different metric that, for instance, could be the length of the perturbation, the distance to the origin of the perturbation. This is it would be the module of its trajectory. And again, we can see similar behavior, that is that the state that present high distance, high length trajectories are the sleep stages, and the one that are less perturbable are the patients. So if we like compute these metrics and do that for, as I say, for all the regions, for all the brain states, we can like summarize how it behaves. And this left panel is summarizing which are the 20% regions of the brain, the regions of the brain which are the best 20% in terms to induce transition toward wakefulness. It means that which are closest to wakefulness. And again, I think that is something that we can see that the posterior part of the formal network is one of the regions that are present in the different brain states that are good to induce good transition toward wakefulness. So, and then we can perform similar stuff. This is, in this case, this is the distance to the origin. This is the mean functional connectivity. This is the network modality. This is the FSC. SC coupling is the metric that we compute after to characterize our latent space. But this is in terms of the perturbations. This is when you perturb each node, it's mean that you are getting certain value of this metric. So this metrics in terms of the perturbation. As you can see, there are not really more interesting information in the mean FC, and the network modularity and SC coupling are quite similar. So in my opinion, the best information that we are getting from here is that the distance to wakefulness. So this is the geometrical quantification of the perturbations in the latent space. So this is the exploration that we perform, that I think that is able to, it's possible to perform different kind of approaches of quantifications in terms of geometrical metrics in two-dimensional space. So, and the last point of the talk is how this approach can behave in different conditions. So we test this approach in a neurodegenerative disease data set to see what happened and to see if this approach that we found in reduced states of consciousness, how is the response in different conditions, because we think that this is like a really generative approach or a general approach, and so it can be applied from different cases, and this is the thing that we get. So I think that the procedure is the same as I said before, but instead considering level of consciousness, we are considering controls, patient, that is the blue one, and two neurodegenerative disease. One is the Alzheimer's disease, and the other is the frontotemporal dementia. And this is two different severity of Alzheimer. The pink one is like a less severe Alzheimer's disease stage, and the red one are like more severe Alzheimer's disease. And from the dimensional, we only have one severity. So in my opinion, the first interesting point is when we represent this state in this two-dimensional latent space, the two diseases is like living in different directions. It's not one direction that guiding as we found in the state of consciousness. And Alzheimer's disease, it seems to be like in one direction that is like organized in the severity. So this direction could be interpreted as the severity of the Alzheimer's disease, but the frontotemporal dementia lives in a different direction. So this is something that we consider interesting, because it's like it's representing two different directions, because there are two different diseases and probably two different mechanisms are involved in these two diseases. Here we are represented the distance to wakefulness or to the control case in this case for each cases. And here we present again that we call the perturbative landscape, that is how it behaves all the perturbation for the different nodes. And and again, we are mapping as a trajectories in this space. So this is the first row is that we call the wave perturbation. That is the perturbation that I present in the previous approach. So as you can see, it seems like perturb the Alzheimer stages, the low severe Alzheimer disease. When you perturb, it seems that there's a lot of perturbation that could be good to induce transition through the control stage. When you are like in more severe stage, it seems like a couple of that, and from the dementia temporary, it seems that only one seems to move close to the healthy control stage. And this is two different kind of perturbations that we perform. The one that we call synchronization, another that what we call noise, that basically is only change the bifurcation parameter. So synchronization, we are getting the bifurcation parameter that we get in the model, and we are increasing the value, so we are moving through more oscillatory behavior. And the noise perturbation is we are getting the parameter and moving faster to the bifurcation point toward like a fixed point dynamical behavior. And again, the synchronization perturbation, that is increasing the bifurcation parameter, behaves similar to the wave behavior, but the noisy one seems to induce non-transition except from one case in FTT. So we think that is something could be interesting to explore more in detail, but basically it's the application of this framework to neurodegenerative disease. But this is the end of talk. So mainly the conclusions is the things that we already talked, but basically we combine this approach to find both approaches, that is hybrid model and data augmentation and deep learning, to find a low dimensional representation of brain state. In the case of the reduced state of consciousness, we find like an ordinary trajectory that seems to encode or to represent the loss of consciousness to wakefulness toward brain injury patients. And we quantify these states in terms of metrics that are well known as the modularity and the coupling between the function and the structure. Then we investigate the perturbations through a model, and we are able to map these perturbations into a two-dimensional latent space and to visualize it and to provide geometrical metrics to evaluate these perturbations in order to evaluate this transition. And in this case, with this framework, we are able to provide some kind of insights about which kind of perturbation could be good to induce transition in the different brain states. And at the end, we apply this approach to different brain states, to different states as a neurogenetic disease, with the same idea to provide some insights in terms of the perturbation. So I think that one of in terms of this clinical aspect, I think that something that is important to explore or to go deeper is like in an individual model and an individual assessment of this kind of stuff, because this is like in a global model, as I say. So in order to provide like some robust clinical insights, it's like really like conceptual. So I think that the next step should be to an individual model to provide more robust approach to insights on treatments and so on. So this is all. Thank you again for you for being here to listen me, and again to Gonzalo, to Pascal to organize that question discussing.
So I assume your latent space is more than 2 dimensions, right? The actual latent representation.
You can no. In this case, it's the two-dimensional, but you can build an latent space.
Okay.
A big version.
Okay.
Actually, we test in somehow the dimensionality of the latent space, because probably with more dimensions you will get like a better representation. So we test this is the accuracy of a support vector machine classifier in terms to classify these 8 classes, these eight brain stages. So the first one is the level that we get when we train the classifier only using the functional connectivity. And the other ones is that we get a latent dimension, different dimensions of our latent space. So we found that with 2 is when we are getting the really improvement of the classifier. And then it's like saturates in almost 0.9 when we include more dimensions. So our parsimonious approach, we say, okay, let's take 2. That is the one that is good enough, and 2 is really nice to get like nice visualization in 2-dimensional space. So this is the version.
Okay.
But yes, you can take. I mean, we are working like that slightly different approach to train autoencoders, and we found like in several cases, in several data sets and so on, that a good dimension to represent like more generative states is more close to 8. We are looking.
Okay, but if you would use 8 or like more than 2, then you would need like some mapping to visualize them, right? And then all the interpretations, the geometrical interpretation in this 2-dimensional visualization, at some point you have to like ensure that all this holds then also in the actual latent space, right? If you use more than 2 dimensions.
If I use more than 8 dimensions, I will take a different approach to quantify it. I want, because you can put 8 dimensions and then you can use a different strategy to visualize in 2 dimensions. For instance, you can make like this knee to visualize your 8 dimensions in the 2 dimensions. But in this case, I will work in the 8-dimensional space, for instance. And I do it so in this case, instead to quantify in terms of trajectories, I I used to use classifiers and say, okay, I create a 8-dimensional, I train a classifier with the 8 dimensions. And then when I put some, so for instance, I perturb the model and I get a perturbation and I get the perturbed one. So, and then I ask the classifier, how classify the perturbed one. So instead to use a geometrical quantification, I use a classifier, I leave a classifier to define it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks for a really interesting talk. I was interested in the stuff to do with Alzheimer's at the end and these perturbations, where you're perturbed back towards the healthy state. Do you expect that to be like a long-term change, or these are neurodegenerative diseases that do decay back to where you were long-term?
The answer is I don't know, but it's good the question, and it's something that the methodology can maybe I remember with explaining that in this case the system is still perturbed. So it's not that I apply a perturbation and then I turn off the perturbation and see what happened. So in this case, this perturbation that is like approaching to a healthy is with the perturbation on. So when you turn off the perturbation, generally it returns to, but not to the same state. So there's like an hysteresis on this trajectory in this 3-dimensional space, but should be investigated in detail because I really, my answer is I don't know, but probably there's some perturbation that is also living closer to the healthy control, but not as it represents, because as I show it is like with the perturbation on.
So thank you for the talk. What happened when you perturb many different brain areas? Did you try that, or do you only
more than 2?
Yeah.
Yeah. In general, you start to have like really. It happens similar stuff, but the thing that because I want to do like in an exact way, when you start to put 3, the combination explodes because you need like combine 90 by 3, so and then it start to explode. But if you perturb more regions, like it's all start to be like more on. It's like you are like enlightened. It's like you are providing a lot of energy to the system, so it's starting to light all the brain, all the connections. So it's
Can you do it like in sequence maybe? Or?
yeah. So in some point, you can do that, and also you can like establish a kind of hierarchy. So we working some time on that with Gus. So you can perturb one node for one node, two. You say, okay, this guy is the best one. So you take off this region. So you keep with n-1. Say, okay, I repeat the process. So we keep with one node. So you can be sequentially, and you can establish like a hierarchy of which nodes are more important to be perturbed itself. But yes, it's interesting to explore like in deep that.
Just I have a question on Zoom. Sorry. So to come back to the autoencoder, Frederick is asking, can you talk a bit about the impact of the whole brain data augmentation of the autoencoder?
I don't get it. The impact of?
Sorry, how does the whole brain data augmentation impact the autoencoder? Like maybe if you
no, in this case, the data augmentation procedure is super necessary because otherwise I have not enough data to train autoencoder. So in this case, I train autoencoder with functional connectivity. So it means that one participant could be, in my case, is one functional connectivity. And now we have like order of 20, 30 participants by each stage. So it's not enough data to train the autoencoder. So the data augmentation is, with this approach, is like a crucial point. In other case, I cannot train the autoencoder. With this approach, otherwise you can create different kind of data augmentation that is quite common, as Gustavo also before. You can use like sliding window and create different functional activity. So that through each sliding window, but I don't know. We like to use this like data augmented through the model. So, but it's necessary, sure.
I was interested in when you looked at the different levels of consciousness, and you looked at functional connectivity there, and you had two other measures as well. You sort of ranked all the states. And it was interesting because the deep sleep and the sedated state, now it was, so the deep sleep there and sedated state, they're basically the same there for functional connectivity, like the one, the mean, but they're very, but they're super different there for the
It's true for the modularity.
Modularity and the structural functional coupling. What's the intuition there?
No, the intuition is that these two metrics are more related with the structure, and this metric is more related with how the system is like with the background level. I mean, it's communicated itself or not. So this means that in these cases, it seems that if you have more FC and C coupling, it means that you have like more similarity between the structure, between the functional and the structural one. And the other cases you are metric if the system are similarly connected or not in terms of the amount of connectivity, knowing the kind of this connection.
I have a question also. In your model, you have like an homogeneous model, and the inhomogeneity comes from a measurement that it's the functional connectivity. So basically, break the homogeneity of your model by this coupling strength. Have you tried, and you use like the same excitability for all the oscillators?
No.
No. Okay.
No. The homogeneity is true that the coupling strength is homogeneous, but not the bifurcation parameter, because the bifurcation parameter is trained using this resting state network belonging. So I have like 6 different parameters for the A's. So then I put like the linear combination of, for instance, I have the region 1 that, because a region could belong for more than one resting state. So I train with the genetic algorithm, I train the bifurcation parameters, the group bifurcation parameters of each resting state network. And then I get the A for each region by making the linear combination of each parameter that I get for each resting state and the belonging. At the end of the day, I have a different A for different role. Sorry if I was not clear on that.
Great, thanks.
Hi, thanks. I was wondering about the role of perturbation here. So on one hand, we could view it as a kind of parameter sensitivity analysis on your modeling and computational approach. But on the other hand, if we could look at it is to look into brain function hierarchy, and people discussed criticality and those kinds of issues. But all these states except the wakefulness are pretty much states where the brain is not responding to the external world. So how should we understand the role of perturbation?
I think that the role in terms of, I don't know if I understand the question, but I understand the role of perturbation as an really induced perturbation, not as the response of, for instance, the environment. I think the perturbation as a clinical perturbation, as a TMS, or in my mind, the perturbation is representing this kind of intervention, not the environment. I mean, because as you say, a perturbation won't wake up an anesthesia participant if I clap on the side or maybe something of that. But it's true that if you apply an analytical stimuli there's an experiment on monkeys, for instance, you apply a DBS on monkey who is anesthetized, the monkey wakes up. So I think this kind of perturbation as that one, like external intervention, on purpose. So, but this true could be interesting if somehow we can represent perturbations like in a different way, like more natural. perturbations as something like, yes, some engagement with the environment, like more simple perturbation.
So you fit your model to the data, the functional connectivity data, and how do you then ensure that it captures the critical amount of variability or information in this data? So do you look how much it can predict from the functional data or the measured data, or when do you say the model is good enough?
Yes, in general, we use this model fitted parameter, this model fitting, goodness of fitting of our model, that is the level of SSM that we are. No, this goodness of fit, that is this structural similarity index, that is the way that we are like quantify how good are our models in terms of
What would you then say?
good in terms of
as sufficiently good, that's not good, and what you do then it's not good.
no, it's as each model is a goodness of fit of the model. I mean, so I capture the good one, how good is model by this value.
So sure, this is now a model which I trust that it my data. So good, well, yes, sure, but there must be some. Okay, this is not too bad. This is okay. So
okay, yes. I mean, we have been using this model. It has been used this model in the literature previously. That used to be reasonable of the goodness of the fit of this kind because of the last 10 years, but it's true.
How are they? I just miss them, so I don't know.
No, okay. Opinion, I trust in the model because I can to represent between this state in terms of a classifier, for instance. So in this case, I create my confidence on the model because I can, that as you say, I can like recover something that are in the different brain states because I am able to classify these different brain states with a support beta machine, for instance, using the data that I model. But it's true that always, as all the models, so the level of confidence of the model, it's always.
You don't care so much about how much of the original function connectivity data you can fit by that model, but more what you then can predict with that model.
No, I care because if I build a model, for instance, and I have like a correlation, I use the SSM that I know that, for instance, 0.4 of the SSM is a quite good value that I get it in the functional connectivity. And as before, for instance, in the previous literature, you used to use the correlation, for instance, between the functional connectivity empirical and the functional connectivity model. And for parcellations around 100 regions, it used to be like 0.5, a good level of correlation that it seems okay. I capture the structure that I have in the empirical with my model. How much? In a 50% of in the 0.5 of the correlation. Okay, is good enough. So I use this value of SSM, that is something taking into account of the correlation and also taking into account of the level of the background information or of the background connectivity. And in previous works, it showed that more or less 0.4 is a good value that you're saying, okay, I'm capture part of the correlation and I capture part of the level of the matrix, and I say, okay, it's good enough. But it's true, it's a model, and it's a model. I capture part of the thing that we're having in data, and for sure I lost part of that. But I'm able to represent the brain state through 7 parameters instead to use like a high dimensional data. So in between, it's a model. It's true.
No, but, I just wonder.
But I build confidence on that, on this way of quantify the similarities between the model and the empirical functional activity, and take into account that with this functional activity model, I'm able to classify this stuff. So I say, okay, I capture something that is different in these states. But in some point, I think that as it's a model, so I am lose part of the information that I have in the empirical data. So if it would be possible, it should be great to train with the empirical data directly, for instance. But in between, by using a model, I'm able to perform model perturbations that otherwise with empirical data, I will need the empirical data for perturbation. That also should be really difficult. So somehow I leverage that I use in the model as well. Not severe.
Any other? Thank you.
Thank you all of that.